Okay, we are here on the outskirts of the University of Houston at the Clinical Research Services area for psychological counseling, and we're here because of a program that's offered in this building on strategic foresight, F-O-R-E-S-I-G-H-T. And I first found out about the foresight process when I was doing education research, and I was investigating Global Education Futures Forum and Pavel Luksha, who is affiliated with Skolkovo Institute in Russia. And he and Tom Vander Ark, who is a Gates Foundation guy, and many others were engaged in this process called foresight, which is looking at signals and anticipated emerging technologies and creating a future forecast of what the future might look like. And within the work that Global Education Futures Forum had done, they had a whole map of the future of education out to 2035 with all sorts of color bands in different areas, from everything from like prenatal university to virtual reality addiction, and all of these things in different distinct time layers when they anticipated they would happen. And so when I was doing my early research, people kept asking like, wow, you must be really smart. And I said, no, but I just found this map, and then I pay attention to the world around me. I pay attention to the news, and it's tracking pretty closely to what these foresight futurists have put together. So one of the local regional programs is here at the University of Houston, and someone whose work I saw early on in education, her name is Elizabeth Merritt, and she is the futurist for the American Alliance of Museums, AAM. And in 2014, I believe, she had done a report for the Henry Ford Foundation on the future of museums in education. Now, I love a good museum. In fact, I used to work for a public botanic garden. I love cultural institutions. But in this document, she had written a chapter essentially stating that the future of education would be that bricks and mortar schools would go away, that we would have this learning ecosystem model that's coming up that is like a Pokemon Go program of going out and doing activities in your community to earn badges, both to show your skills and your behavioral compliance, and that is something that's being advanced by KnowledgeWorks. And that essentially she reflected that schools, bricks and mortar neighborhood schools, were training children for jobs that would no longer exist, and that they were not training children for this future that would be gig economy work, TaskRabbit work, sort of cutthroat work, competing against children from all over the world through virtual reality. And as part of this, there was a separate document that she wrote that was a short story called A Learning Day 2037. And you can look it up, it's an 8-page PDF. But essentially this scenario that was painted, this foresight scenario, described a young girl, Moya, and her brother, Inert. And Moya was like a Hispanic student, low-income student, who was a striver, someone who wanted to do well for herself and her family. She was living in this enclosed community where they did fish farming and grew fruit, but they weren't allowed to eat it. And she worked really hard on her online learning academics with the goal of wanting to be a museum curator, and that she would wander around these virtual reality museums to learn things. But her brother, who actually really very much wanted to be in the real world, rebelled, and he ate the peaches, and he didn't do the online schooling. And so that was sort of the narrative that was framed out. And when I read it about 3 or 4 years ago, it seemed so far away. It seemed so very far away, this idea of foresight. But now I realize that it's not so far away, and you know, the COVID lockdowns, biosurveillance have put everything on a fast forward, and that is by design. And so I just wanted to take a moment to stop here at the University of Houston to point out that these things aren't happening by accident, that there are powerful individuals who are trained to do this signals intelligence that will then create futures narratives that they can then send to behavioral those doing behavioral research, those doing focus group research, who like frameworks that they can then move society's mindset into accepting this reality that is being planned out, a reality of social enclosures and digital surveillance. And University of Houston is a big part of that. We're not going to stop at this site, but University of Houston also has a footprint. They're active in nanotech fabrication, and we're going to focus more on that tomorrow with Rice University and their nanofabrication processes. But the nano space is very much occupied by the University of Houston as well. And it's sort of this false premise of abundance when you create virtual manufacturing with nanotechnologies. And that is all part of this futures building that the Foresight people are the pitchmen for. And just in closing, you will notice that this particular building is not looking so great. It's very mildewy and water damaged. And this harkens back to when I was at the episode with the shopping center with all of the graffiti, is that in this future that she is planning out, everyone does wearable technology. And so through your augmented reality, in the short story she wrote, Moya, she had ill-fitting ogles, she called them, which is the VR headset. No one would pay for a Hispanic girl to have implants, these augmented reality implants. But in this future world, essentially, the actual material world starts to look like this, like mold-infested, soggy, prefab buildings. But in your mind's eye, with the wearables, you just make it into whatever fantasy you can imagine.